The air in the grand ballroom was thick with respect, a heavy, silent reverence that settled over the sea of dark suits and crisp dress uniforms. I sat at a round table draped in white linen, the starched collar of my army service uniform a familiar, grounding weight against my neck. The anxiety knotting in my stomach wasn't for the decorated generals or esteemed guests surrounding us. It was for the people seated right next to me. My family. I could feel their collective gaze on me, not with pride, but with a kind of confused tolerance, as if I were a strange piece of furniture they'd been forced to bring along. My uncle, Mark, a man whose pride was measured solely in public perception and other people's envy, adjusted his silk tie and surveyed the room with an owner's gaze. He leaned toward me, the scent of expensive cologne washing over me just as the master of ceremonies stepped to the podium. This was his moment to deliver the final cut. "You know," he whispered, his voice a low hiss meant only for me, "you really don't belong on that stage with them. This is for real heroes, not for kids playing dress-up." He leaned back, a smug little smile playing on his lips. Frankly, it's embarrassing. The words didn't even sting anymore, not in the sharp, fresh way they used to. They landed with a dull, heavy thud in the pit of my stomach, a familiar poison. My hands began to shake beneath the table, a tremor I'd learned to hide but never quite control. It wasn't rage. It was exhaustion. It was the crushing weight of a final confirmation, the sound of a door I had been knocking on my whole life finally being bricked over. This was it. The moment the last, stubborn thread of hope I didn't even know I was holding had finally, irrevocably snapped. I looked at his face, so confident in his judgment, and saw a reflection of every dismissal and condescending remark from the past decade. And the worst part? As my uncle smirked, confident in his judgment, I knew he was just saying what my entire family had always believed. His whisper was just the loudest echo of a story I had been living my whole life. That whisper from my uncle was just a single sentence, but it was built on a foundation of 1,000 moments just like it. The story really belonged to my cousin Kevin, Uncle Mark's son, and the family's undisputed golden child. I vividly remember the year he was promoted at his junior investment firm. My entire family gathered at the city's most expensive steakhouse, the kind with thick carpets that silenced your footsteps and waiters who hovered just out of sight. Toasts were made to Kevin's brilliant future. My uncle held up his glass, his eyes practically misty, talking about Kevin's killer instinct and unmatched drive. The promotion, as I later found out, was a move from a cubicle in the center of the office to a slightly larger one by a window. It came with no new title and a negligible raise, but they celebrated it like he'd been named CEO. This was the family's grand narrative, and it was championed by my own parents. My mother, Carol, was a woman who equated financial statements with a report card on life, and she saw Kevin's bi-weekly paycheck as a mark of genius. She wasn't malicious, just blinded by convention. My father, on the other hand, was a quiet man who followed his louder brother's lead, outsourcing his opinions on success to Uncle Mark. To them, Kevin's path was the only path. It was safe, it was prestigious, and most importantly, it was something they could brag about to their friends. My decision to enlist in the Army after 2 years of college was, in their eyes, a catastrophic failure. I'll never forget the phone call I made after finishing my final field certification for combat medic training. For 3 weeks, we'd been living in the mud, running drills until our muscles screamed, learning to triage and treat horrific injuries under the most intense simulated pressure imaginable. I was covered in grime, my uniform was stained with sweat and simulated blood, but I had never felt more proud or more certain of my purpose. I found a payphone and called home, my voice buzzing with accomplishment. I told my mom I'd finished, that I was officially a 68 whiskey. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she finally said, her voice distant. "Anyway, you won't believe what happened. Kevin is thinking of leasing a BMW." The line went quiet for a moment before she added, "So, when do you think you'll be done with this Army thing and get a real job?" That was the moment the internal ledger began. Her question was just one entry on a list that grew longer every year. It was there in the condescending questions at holidays. "Do you get to shoot the fun guns?" Kevin would ask with a smirk. It was there in their complete disinterest in my letters from deployment. I tried to explain the heat, the weight of my gear, the faces of the local kids, the quiet terror and the immense responsibility. In return, I'd get an email about the family's new patio furniture, or how Kevin's golf handicap was improving. They didn't want to hear my reality. It didn't fit the story they'd written for me. In their world, I was the aimless screw-up who needed the military for discipline. I was the child who lacked direction and couldn't handle the pressures of the real world. Kevin's world of spreadsheets and office politics. My service wasn't a sacrifice. It was a remedial course for a life gone wrong. They saw my uniform not as a symbol of commitment, but as a costume for someone who couldn't make it anywhere else. They loved me, I suppose, in the way you love a disappointing but familiar piece of furniture. You don't get rid of it, but you certainly don't display it in the front room. The truth is, they needed me to be the failure. My supposed lack of direction made Kevin's tiny achievements seem monumental. My choice to serve a cause bigger than myself was so foreign to them that they had to shrink it down, belittle it, and file it under phase. They had to believe I was playing a game so they wouldn't have to confront the reality that I was living a life-and-death existence they couldn't possibly comprehend. They needed me to be the invisible child, so their golden boy could shine all the brighter. Sitting there at that dinner, listening to my uncle's insult, I saw the narrative laid out plain. They would always see me as the aimless screw-up, and Kevin as the star. I realized they would never choose to see the real me. So I decided I was done waiting for them to open their eyes. The decision to stop fighting for their approval wasn't made in anger. It was a quiet surrender, the kind that feels less like a defeat and more like a long-overdue peace treaty with reality. The hurt from years of being overlooked finally calcified into something hard, clear, and calm: resolve. I stopped needing them to understand me. The new goal wasn't to win their love, because I finally realized their love came with conditions I could never meet. The new goal was simply to own my own story, and to stop letting them scribble their false narrative in the margins of my life. My receipts weren't angry text messages or old journal entries. They were held in the memory of a single afternoon in Afghanistan. The ambush was a textbook execution of chaos. One second, our convoy was kicking up dust under a relentless sun. The next, the world dissolved into thunder and smoke. The lead vehicle was hit, and the air filled with the shriek of metal, the crackle of radios, and a sound I'll never forget: the sudden, shocked silence of men who realize they are in a fight for their lives. As the platoon's medic, my world shrank to the calls for doc. I moved through the storm of dust and bullets, my training taking over my limbs, my mind a blank slate of procedural calm. That's when I found him. A sergeant major, a man who seemed indestructible just moments before, was down, bleeding heavily from his leg and side. His name was Williams. I did my job. I applied pressure, packed the wound, secured a tourniquet, and talked to him the whole time, keeping him anchored to the world as he threatened to drift away. I don't remember feeling heroic. I just remember the metallic taste of fear in my mouth, and the singular, overwhelming focus of keeping this man, and 2 others I treated after him, from dying in the dirt. It was the longest and shortest 20 minutes of my life. We all made it out of there, but that afternoon left a permanent mark on my soul. It was a truth I held inside me, a truth my family could never comprehend. Weeks before the awards dinner, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my barracks. It bore the official seal of the Veterans Support Foundation. Inside, the invitation was printed on heavy cardstock, all formal swirls and elegant script. My eyes scanned the details until they landed on a single typed line at the bottom that made my breath catch in my throat. Your presence is personally requested by this year's guest of honor and keynote speaker, Medal of Honor recipient Sergeant Major Williams. He had survived, and he had remembered. In that moment, I felt a grim sense of destiny settle over me. The universe was presenting a bill, and my family was about to see the cost. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple. I would do nothing. I showed the invitation to my parents, letting them see the fancy letterhead and the formal occasion. I watched them construct their own narrative around it. They assumed it was some mandatory low-level event, another part of the game I was playing. They were excited to go, to rub shoulders with important people, to see my cousin Kevin network. They had no idea they were walking into the one place on Earth where their narrative held no power. I didn't lie to them, I just let them believe what they already had for years, that I was an insignificant footnote in a world of important men. It was the only way. If I had told them the truth, they would have found a way to diminish it. They would have questioned it, or worse, they would have tried to absorb my story into their own, twisting it into some proof of their good parenting. The truth had to come from an outside source, an unimpeachable witness whose word was law. It had to be delivered in a public square where they couldn't run, hide, or change the subject to Kevin's new car. My family saw the uniform, but they didn't see the soldier inside it, They saw the invitation, but they didn't know my name was on it for a reason. I had the truth on my side, held in the memory of a man they were all about to celebrate as a national hero. All I had to do was wait. The room fell into a reverent hush as Sergeant Major Williams approached the podium. He was a man carved from granite and grit, his presence filling the stage without him needing to say a word. The Medal of Honor rested against his chest, a small, stark symbol of an impossible day. My uncle, Mark, leaned back in his chair, a satisfied look on his face, ready to be inspired by a man he considered a real hero, unlike the embarrassment sitting next to him. I just focused on my breathing, a slow in and out, anchoring myself against the storm I knew was coming. Sergeant Major Williams didn't start with thank yous or platitudes. He started with a story. We were 10 miles deep in a valley that had a bad habit of swallowing patrols, he began, his voice calm and steady, yet carrying the weight of memory. He painted a picture of the ambush with terrible clarity, the sudden, deafening explosion that tossed his vehicle like a toy, the rain of hot metal, the disorienting concussion that followed. He spoke of the dust and the smoke, so thick you could taste it, and the chilling symphony of chaos that replaced the desert silence. The entire ballroom was leaning in, captivated. He then spoke of his own injuries, describing the moment he looked down and saw the ruin of his own leg with a detached sense of disbelief. I was a passenger in my own body at that point, he said, his gaze distant. I was calculating how much time I had left. I was sure I was going to die in that dirt. Another name on a memorial wall. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the silent room. I was ready to let go. But someone else wasn't. His voice shifted, losing its detached quality and gaining a new, raw intensity. Through the smoke and the noise, a specialist appeared, a kid, really. But this kid moved with a purpose I'd never seen. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for orders. He described how this young medic dragged him and 2 other wounded soldiers into the scant cover of a ditch, all while rounds snapped through the air around them. He spoke of tourniquets applied with brutal efficiency and a calm voice cutting through his pain, promising him he wasn't going anywhere. His eyes scanned the silent, captivated audience. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. Then his gaze stopped. It locked onto me. It felt like a physical connection, a current passing across the vast room. The world seemed to narrow to the space between his podium and my chair. "The Army gave me this medal," he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "But the reason I'm alive to wear it is because of that specialist. They're in this room tonight." He took a breath, and into the microphone he spoke my name. "Specialist Miller, will you please stand?" For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a spotlight hit our table, blinding me. A wave of confusion rippled through the audience, then it crested into a roar of thunderous applause as people got to their feet. A standing ovation. Sergeant Major Williams was still looking at me, a profound gratitude in his eyes. And then he delivered the final blow, his voice ringing with absolute sincerity. "I've been waiting to meet you again properly, and to thank you in front of the world." The sound from the crowd was deafening, but all I could register was the complete and utter silence at my own table. I risked a glance. My uncle's face, so smug just moments before, had turned a pasty ashen white. The color had drained from it, leaving a mask of pure horrified shock. My cousin Kevin's jaw was slack, his master of the universe smirk completely gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, slack-jawed stare. My mother's hand was clasped over her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the stage as if she couldn't reconcile the 2 images. Their entire world, their carefully constructed narrative, had just been demolished by a national hero on live television. Their perfect story was in ashes around their feet. And in the thunderous applause from a room full of strangers, the silence from my own family's table was the only thing I could hear. I didn't feel rage or triumph. I just felt free. For the first time, I was the one who got to define who I was. Rose from my chair on unsteady legs, my body still buzzing from the shock. As I gave a respectful nod to Sergeant Major Williams, the applause from the room washed over me again. The walk from the table felt like a mile. Strangers reached out to shake my hand, patting my shoulder with words like, "Thank you for your service, soldier and incredible." Their faces were filled with genuine admiration. All the while, my family trailed a few feet behind me, a silent, awkward procession of ghosts in the wake of my new reality. The contrast was dizzying. The warmth from a room full of people I didn't know, and the icy, dead space from the only people who were supposed to matter. We didn't speak in the car on the way back. The silence was a living thing, thick with unspoken accusations and shattered pride. They dropped me at my barracks, and I closed the door on their stunned faces without a word. Inside, the quiet was a relief. A few hours later, my phone, which had been dark, lit up with a vengeance. There were flustered, confused texts from my mother. A string of question marks from my father. Then came the one I was expecting, from my uncle, Mark. His message wasn't an apology. It was pure, distilled rage. It read, "What the hell was that? You sat there and let us believe you were nothing and then pull a stunt like that? You did this on purpose to embarrass me. You owe me an explanation." I stared at the words, at the complete absence of understanding, at the raw, selfish anger of a man whose ego had been wounded. The old me would have been devastated. The old me would have tried to explain, to defend myself, to somehow make it right. But the person reading that text wasn't the invisible child anymore. I didn't feel anger or a need for revenge. I just felt pity. I held my finger over his name, pressed block, and then deleted the entire conversation thread. With a simple tap on a screen, 10 years of seeking his approval vanished into the digital ether. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For a moment, I lay in bed, trying to identify a feeling that was completely foreign to me. It was lightness. The heavy, leaden blanket of anxiety and resentment that had been my constant companion for years was just gone. The air in my room seemed clearer, the morning light brighter. I got up and looked at my uniform, hung neatly on the closet door. It wasn't their costume for me anymore. It wasn't the symbol of my failure or their disappointment. It was mine. It represented my choices, my sacrifices, and my strength. I saw it for what it was for the first time. Armor I had earned. A few weeks later, I walked into my company commander's office, my back straight and my steps certain. Captain Eva Rostova, a woman who led with a quiet confidence I deeply admired, looked up from her desk. "Miller," she said with a nod. "What can I do for you?" I placed a folder on her desk. It was my application packet for the Dust-Off Flight Medic Selection Program, one of the most demanding and competitive specializations for a 68W. It meant more training, more danger, and a level of responsibility that would crush most people. She opened the folder and read through it, a slow smile spreading across her face. "It's about time," she said, looking right at me. "I'll write your letter of recommendation myself." I heard whispers about my family through a cousin I still spoke to occasionally. Apparently, my uncle and Kevin were trying desperately to spin the story. They were telling their friends at the country club that they always knew I was a hero, that my quiet nature was just humility, but their friends had been at the dinner. They had seen the looks on their faces. The story didn't stick. Their social currency, the only thing they truly valued, had taken a massive hit. They weren't a source of pain for me anymore. They were just a distant, pathetic echo. They were still playing their game, but I wasn't on the board anymore. I learned that some people will only ever see you as the character they wrote for you in their story. True honor isn't found in their applause, but in the quiet courage to live your own truth. If you've ever had to fight to be seen for who you really are, drop a comment below. Your story matters.